Well, this will be page 3 today for chapter 21 on the Industrial Revolution. We'll go to number 29, I think. I'm going to talk about that one. Well, maybe later. Okay, we start with Edward Jenner. He found a way to prevent smallpox, and he did some work in a dairy where there was a disease called cowpox, and he noticed that the people that worked in the dairy day in, day out really never were suffering from any ill effects of this cowpox. But somebody who maybe just happened by that got it, then they felt the full effects of that. And so he came up with the concept that the vaccination is an injection with a solution of weakened germs to prevent a disease. So just like if any of you go out and get a flu shot, you're actually being injected with a weak solution of the flu virus. And so when you get a full-blown case of it, you're not affected. But when you get the shot, then you sometimes feel weak because you have a small case of the flu. So that's how a vaccination works. Louis Pasteur proved that diseases are caused by microscopic organisms, and he came up with the concept of pasteurization. You can see that's named after him, Louis Pasteur, pasteurization. It's a way of using heat to sterilize milk. So they heat it up, they kill the bacteria in it, and then it's good for a while to be used. Just a little side note, there's another thing that goes along with milk, and that's called homogenization, and that's where they treat it so that it doesn't separate. Because if you, say you went out and milked a cow, you had a bottle of milk, then the cream would separate and come to the top. But with homogenization, it keeps it separated for a long period of time. Now, if it sits and sits and sits, then eventually it will separate and go bad and all of that stuff. So, okay. Dmitri Mendeleev. A lot of you probably in chemistry are very well aware of this periodic table. So he worked out a table that classified the elements according to their atomic structure or weight. So there's different letters that stand for the different elements in it. I believe some of them are based on Latin, and so they don't exactly match up with the word that they're identifying. One thing that was interesting that I remember about the table is that there were some elements that he didn't know about, but he knew they were there, and so he kind of left empty spaces in the table, and those have since been filled in, so that's pretty cool. Okay, this man's name, Wilhelm Röntgen. So he discovered rays that could penetrate solid substances, and we call those X-rays. Now, you know, if you're looking at somebody, obviously you're not going to be able to see, you know, through their clothes at their body. What an X-ray does is it goes through the whole body and will identify anything that is a solid matter, solid component, like a bone. So you can see there's an X-ray there, a little instrument, a ring on the finger. I'm not sure what that is, but those are the things that the X-ray will pick up. And so, you know, you can see a light gray area, and that's the skin and muscle tissue in the body. But the darker surfaces are the solid ones, like the bones. So, and the reason he called them X-rays is he really didn't know what they were. He knew they were there, but wasn't quite sure what to call them or how to identify them. So he just called them X-rays. Okay. Albert Einstein. Einstein's theory of relativity. This one stated that Newton's laws do not work on objects moving at speeds near the speed of light. I think his theory, Newton's laws, were something in motion will stay in motion until something else acts upon it. Like if you get launched, you'll stay in motion until gravity takes effect and pulls you to the ground. And then Einstein's theory of relativity, E equals mc squared, or mass and energy can be converted into each other. So I think the speed of light is 186,000 miles per second. Anyway, yeah, pretty fast. So I always ask the question, what if you have something traveling at that speed and there's a light on it and you turn the light on? Does the light still go ahead of it? It probably does, but anyway. Okay? Oh, I don't know if I ever told you this story about Einstein. I think it's pretty cool. So when he was a young boy, probably elementary school, he really struggled at school and just was having a difficult time. And back then, you know, they didn't have other measures to help and no real requirements to help. And so they wrote a note saying, "There's nothing. Your boy is basically too dumb to learn. There's nothing we can do for him. You'll have to teach him yourself." And so they put that note and pinned it to him, and he went home with it. And his mother saw it, and of course he wanted to know what it said. And she told him, and I just think what a mother this was to do this. She said to him, "Well, you're just too smart for everything they have at the school. There's nothing they can teach you there. So they sent you home for us to teach you on our own." And look what he's become. Pretty amazing story. Okay? So we talked about this in chapter 1, the theory of evolution, the idea that living things change over time and that one species might slowly evolve into another. And then the principle of, natural selection. That'll be on the next slide, sorry. So remember those first pictures. So this is a story about Charles Dickens. So he went to this island and he saw those first pictures. This flower with a huge blossom and then a long stem part on the flower. And when they first arrived, he saw the flower and he said, "Somewhere on this island is an insect with a proboscis, which is your nose, that's about 11 inches long." And eventually they did find one, and it was a big moth, and you go back to those pictures, you could see them. And so the moth would hover around the flower and it could get the nectar down in the bottom of that flower. He knew that before even seeing it, based on that flower. So then the principle of natural selection, certain living things will survive and others will die before they have offspring. So the concept of the smarter, faster, stronger ones are going to be the ones that survive. In this picture, there's different types of birds here, and you can see the length of their beak, and this one here, pretty stout jaw on the bird, and also the beak is very heavy. And so depending on what types of foods were available, they could eventually develop into something that they could, dig underneath bark and crack open shells and different things like that. All right, Gregor Mendel, he was a pioneer in the field of heredity. Genes carry traits from parent to offspring, and genetics are the study of inherited traits. So some things we learn and some things are inherited from our parents. Certainly looks. My daughter Kelsey, young baby picture of her, very similar to one of mine. My oldest daughter, Caitlin, if you cover her eyes up and look at just her lower part of her face, there's a picture of my wife when she was about 4 years old, and it looks just like that. So certain things are inherited. I remember on one occasion stepping out in the hall and seeing a father and son walk down the hall, and I just noticed a very similar gait as they walked down the hall. So certain things are learned or inherited. Others may be acquired over time based on the example of the parent. So anyway, interesting area. Okay. Sociology is the scientific study of human society. So in our next page, we'll talk about psychology. Sorry. But sociology is the study of us as a group of people. So I had a college professor, I had a sociology class, and pretty much every day when he came in, he says, why do we do the things we do? So why, as a group of people, do we do certain things? Now, psychology is why do you as an individual do the things that you're doing? What upbringing, what effect of your parents, what treatment to you by your parents has caused you to be the way you are. So we'll talk about that one later. Interesting little cartoon, I don't know if you could see it. So here's a sociology department, here's a couple out in front, they're having lunch. She says, I love our lunches out here, but I always get the feeling that we're being watched. And so, people from the sociology department might be using their binoculars to observe their behavior. Okay, so that's the end of page 3. Just a little thing. There's no theory of evolution, just a list of creatures that Chuck Norris has allowed to live. So, all right, thank you.